So, sight measuring. Alright. So have you seen this before when you do that? Yeah. Okay. So, and have you used it?
I've tried to use it, and when I think about it, it makes sense. But then when I tend to not use it regularly. When I probably should.
Yeah. I don't like to use it a lot for myself.
Okay.
I use it where I know I kind of need to check on something.
Okay.
Like when there's foreshortening, when I know something about something,
Yeah.
that I'm going to want to exaggerate that dimension to be in alignment with what I know.
Okay.
For example, my arm, this half is about the same length, or a leg, right? So, but if I bend my arm or turn it towards you,
Yeah.
now this is big
Yeah.
and long, and this is shorter,
Right.
right? But I know they're supposed to be the same, so I'm going to want to make this part the same as that, or at least longer than what I'm seeing it as,
Right.
right? So that's a time to sight measure. I find it a little arduous to do it a lot.
Okay.
Some people love it, that are more analytical in the way they see and draw or think. And some people would rather have a looser, more way of finding the drawing.
Okay.
Like your friend Ashley, who
Yes.
likes to find it. So I taught her more loose ways. But she also learned some sight measuring, because sometimes we need it, right? So, okay, so the method then is to, and what really helps, like you might want to do a drawing this way. Sometimes put a piece of acetate or use one of those dry erase markers and trace what you see through your window onto the window. And that's basically what's happening when we're drawing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to get a piece of glass and I'm going to show you this. Okay, so I have this piece of plexiglass here. So basically what's happening when we're drawing, we have a piece of, imagine there's a window in front of us that's parallel to our chest, right? Perpendicular to the floor, so it's vertical. And then I'm tracing what I see there, closing one eye, and I'm tracing what I see onto this two-dimensional plane. And that's what's happening when we're drawing this on our piece of paper.
Right.
So this thing's called a picture plane.
Okay.
So Brunelleschi discovered this when he was living in Florence, and he looked out his leaded glass window on the street and he said, oh, look at that. And he discovered perspective and figured out the laws of perspective by looking through that window. And then he'd set one up into his studio and be able to draw reclining figures just beautifully. So he had a leaded glass window with a grid on it, right? Because that's how they made them then, just these little squares of glass. And he realized, oh, what a great way to learn how to draw. So he figured out how foreshortening and perspective and all that worked.
Neat.
And so then it was a tool that artists used to actually use a picture plane. And Holbein, I don't know if you've heard of him, a great portraitist. I think King Henry VIII is one of his famous portraits. They actually used picture planes to capture the likeness of the patrons, because they did a lot of portraits in their studio. So before cameras, right?
Yeah.
So that's what's happening when we draw. So the thing to remember is that we're imagining there's this piece of glass between me and the thing I'm seeing, and it's at arm's length,
Okay.
right? And it's parallel to my chest. So when we sight measure, we want to make sure we're holding our pencil flat out in front of us, like this. Alright? So anybody notice how do I hold the pencil when I want it straight in front of me? And I'm using two fingers. So one of the things you want to watch, so that sight measuring gets frustrating if you're not doing it right. And because, what's the point? It doesn't work anyway. And I'm just frustrated. This is not working. So part of it is how you're doing it. By imagining, I'm just now, so when I drew it on here, now what I'm doing is, okay, I'm going to check with my pencil, how wide was that thing that I just drew? It's this one. And then compared to, it's the same height as it is wide. So we're making comparisons in the same measure, right? So up against this picture plane. So if we keep that in mind, it's going to make it easier. So that first thing is that your arm's straight and always straight, because, okay, so line up, say, the top of the jar. This is popcorn. And so you line up one end of the pencil with the edge of the object and your thumb on the other edge. It's just big on my pencil. Okay, now bend your arm and still look at it. Doesn't line up by a lot. So that if you're trying to do something complicated like a person, right, and you're bending your arm different times every time, nothing's gonna be relevant, right? It's all, because it's all one relative compared to another when we're looking for proportions.
Right.
So you go, yeah, but I decided to that and it still doesn't work, it looks awful, and so you know, it doesn't work. But it's just because of sloppiness, so always keep your arm straight.
Okay.
So, and the way I remember this, I learned this, because I sight measured, I was taught in school, everybody's taught to do this in college, but I never really thought about that, and most people don't.
Yeah.
Even in some of the best colleges, they're sloppy. So I was in Paris, and I wanted to learn how to paint. And I was with University of Guelph in Paris, and I got approval to study there and transfer the credit over here, and I had to find somebody to study with. So I found this artist, and she agreed to work with me. And she said, "You want to learn to paint? First you have to learn how to draw." I said, "I already know how to draw." She said, "No, you don't." And unfortunately, I was so young and cocky that I had a hard time handling her. But you know what? The two things she taught me, I went to 2 lessons and dropped her. I wish I wasn't so full of myself at that age. Because those 2 things I teach all the time to students. They were so good. And this was one of them. And one way I remembered it is she used to sight measure with a wooden chopstick. And all of her students, so this is like, she's, I don't know, she was maybe 70 years old when I was studying with her. She went to, so she's kind of old school European, right? She'd try to go around with her chopstick and zap us on our funny bones. Zing! If your arm wasn't straight.
Oh, that'll stick, I guess.
So I don't remember. And it gives me a great story to tell.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's your first thing.
Okay.
So you remember the chopstick lady? Her name's Hannah Bendov. If you ever want to study with her, if she's still around, I don't know. But the next thing is that you're imagining that that piece of glass is, what you just noticed, is parallel to your chest. So when we tend to hold our pencil, we tend to do this.
Yeah.
And we have a short pinky and a long index finger, and so look at how crooked the pencil is in my hand. So that's what we typically do, and we don't think about it. So try this. Try sight measuring something with the pencil flat, right? So just anything, find it. And then tilt this pencil in space. It doesn't necessarily line up, depending on how much you tilt, right? So that you want to be more accurate. And it's tempting, especially if you're doing angled things, to angle your pencil with the object.
Right.
And we want to avoid that. Always imagine there's this imaginary plane between me and the thing I'm seeing. So your pencil is held with 2 fingers out in front of you. Horizontal, vertical, right? Okay, so that, if you have good habits, then it's going to work, and everything's going to be relative, and it's going to be great. And you only do it when you really need to check what you're seeing. So, with this thing, so we're going to do the same thing she did. Where's the center of these things? Okay, and we're going to want it on my page. So this matters if you're painting on canvas. That works out on your page. Right. We had this one student I worked with. She'd always have these still lifes sort of floating in the middle of this big canvas.
Yeah,
Get closer.
The number of times it
Yeah.
life drawing, like, oh, there goes the foot.
Yep, off the edge. So if you do what she's done there, where's my outside edge? How big do I want it? Make sure it fits, especially if you want to do a full figure, make sure the figure's going to fit on the page. So you start with the overall. How wide compared to how tall? Make sure it's going to fit on your page or your canvas. And then where's the center of this composition? So if we say, how wide is this composition compared to its overall height? So for where I'm standing, it's wider than it is tall. And you can make a relative estimate of how much wider. So it's wider than it is tall. So it's not, so right now I have it kind of square and well, it's not. So you can kind of roughly get a sense of where it's going to fit. It's especially important if you're on campus, so that you have a nice composition. It's great on paper, you just crop it. So, and then you say, well, where's halfway between those things? So just trying to find half. Is halfway on the center line of the popcorn jar or not? Where is it? For me, almost, but for you, it wouldn't be. Okay, so then I say, okay, it's going to fit in here, great. So I'm happy. Now, what the other thing we can do is get a sense of the outside rectangle. So if I'm life drawing and I'm having, there's arms and legs sticking out, it's kind of hard to get that space right. You can hold the pencil up vertically to kind of get a sense of what's the negative space, or put two of them together, and then you can get a sense of that rectangle that Zoe was working with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not hard to do. Put a right angle and then just hold it up. And suddenly then it's easier to judge space, especially like, say around the head and the neck, shoulder, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know what you end up having to draw in your scientific career, but spaces around things, and then now you can judge it. So we know that it's going to look something like that here. And you can kind of rough some things in. And then we can also set up horizontal relationships a bit. Okay, this container touches there, this one's this space, that one's there somewhere. And we don't commit ourselves to too much too soon. Right? So you might just kind of, it's going to be somewhere there. It just like when you're first starting your life drawing, it's going to be something like that. That's what I can fit in it. The foot doesn't run off. That always happens to me too, honestly. Okay.
Bad judge of legs.
So, okay, so okay, it's going to be in there. Now I'm going to start with the major thing now. With life drawing, it's a little more involved, but let's say this popcorn jar, it's kind of like the torso, and these are the legs, and there's no head and arms. So, but the torso here, the major thing we want to look at once we know that the appendages are going to fit. So now we want to say, I'm going to anchor it with something well proportioned.
Okay.
I mean, with life drawing, you would do more site measuring first, and you'd find center lines and what have you, but this is a little easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the popcorn container, and we're going to find what's the height compared to the width. So, and be careful where you measure. Are you going to measure highest point to lowest point, the center line, or on the edge? So I find what's most accurate is to do it on the edge. So what we're going to do first to get you started is to move those out of the way and then put them back. So you can actually just see that container. So the easiest place, because we might make this more round. If I make it more round, it's basically taller. If I make it more shortened, it's shorter. So the best place to site measure a cylinder is along its side for the widest point of the ellipse, right, where the edge is, to the straight edge part. That's what we want to site measure, its height.
Okay.
Try to get a sense of lining up the bottom of your pencil and your thumbnail, and then turn it horizontally and compare. And I find it kind of surprising.
Yeah. I mean, it does narrow.
So, but we're
So where are you
just
measuring?
after, so we're not going to tilt the pencil with it. We're just going to hold the pencil vertically and kind of try how tall is it
Yeah.
on the outside edge to how wide the
Yeah,
top
that's the top.
ellipse is there.
Okay.
Or maybe even the base.
Yeah.
Because maybe it's the same as the base. Yeah, it's
Pretty close.
It's surprising. So one of the things that our brain does with, it's a cylinder, it's a mug. Like the typical mug, especially the typical, that white cylinder normal mug,
Yeah.
we think of them as tall.
Yeah.
Do you know that the standard mug is the same width of the mouth as it is tall? And you wouldn't know it. Because our brain looks at it, we perceive this extra height here, we think of it as a tall cylinder, we always draw it taller than it is. So that's the left brain getting in the way and our assumptions, right? So sight measuring, it helps you to say, how wide is it really compared to its height? So we find that it's actually shorter than I thought. Did you find that too?
A little bit.
Yeah, I was surprised. So I'm going to compare the height to the width. So I'm going to say, this is where I want it, it's on the center line, and I want it this tall. And so, and then I'm going to make a judgment that, wow, that was a good guess. So that it seems like the height is about 3/4 of the width. So, and then you might see you're taller than me, so it's going to look different. Right? So one time I had a 7-foot guy in my drawing class. We were drawing cylinders and things. So I had to stand on the drawing stool beside him. We were both embarrassed. Him for being so tall and me for being so short. Teacher had to stand on a stool. But it was the only way to see what he saw.
Yeah.
Because we all stood in that drawing class. It was like at Sheridan College. So, okay, so we say, okay, it's going to be this tall, or this wide, this tall. And now we want to plan its tapering. I kind of knew that sooner than I should have. Sorry. Okay, so then we say, all right, the base is the same as it is, right? So it's the same. So what we're doing is we're not counting 1, 2, 3. We're not doing that. We're just deciding how big do I want it on the page, right? This is a question I often get. So say, okay, it's the same, great. I have to have that the same, and I need to have it equally split either side because it's a symmetrical approach. So I'm going to make a judgment, put a little tick mark there and there, and then I can hold my pencil vertically and use negative space to, what does that angle look like? That's a really skinny piece of pie, right? Now I can make an estimate, and then I want to do it on the other side, same way. And make sure that that looks relatively equal. And you're happy, great. So right now it looks kind of short, but I haven't got my ellipses in yet, right? So, and then circles viewed on an angle, what people tend to do, they'll draw the top one rounder, and the bottom one flatter, because we know it's a circle and we know it has a flat bottom.
Right.
So if you have somebody, honestly, if you have somebody draw who hasn't had a sight measuring lesson, or hasn't done any drawing training, they will always make this rounder and that flatter. Yeah. In fact, sometimes almost